Thank you so much for joining today's CEO Roundtable. We will begin shortly. In the meantime, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, organization, and where you're calling in from. A few call reminders before we get started. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat to reach out to council staff. That will be myself and Jess here today. We have automated live transcript available. If you go to the bottom of your screen, the option to show captions or a live transcript. And always, as a reminder, this meeting is recorded to be shared along with any resources that will be discussed today. So thank you again for joining our roundtable discussion today. We're so grateful that you've joined us for this important conversation. I'll now turn it over to Christy as our moderator and get started.
Thanks, Melissa. Hello, everybody. I'm Christy Naus, President of the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines. It's great to have such interest in today's topic. So really look forward to having this opportunity to converse and share and learn from one another. I will remind you that we'll be using the chat function. So if you have questions along the way, go ahead and use the chat, and we'll do our best to monitor that and interject in a timely manner to get your questions answered or track and answer afterwards. So again, welcome to today's roundtable. We really appreciate this partnership between the Council of Foundations and CEONet in offering these quarterly webinars. As leaders of our community foundations, we're looking for ways to better our connections and relationships, not only with the donors, but also with our community at large. Today, we hope that our conversation will spark inspiration for new and creative ways to cultivate a shared sense of community and belonging. So I'm joined with our peers today, Bob Sorge, President of the Madison Community Foundation, Eileen Ellsworth, President and CEO of the Community Foundation for Northern Virginia, Mark Brewer, President and CEO of the Central Florida Foundation, Karen Simmons, President and CEO of the Chester County Community Foundation in Pennsylvania, and her colleague, Timmy Nelson, who is an outreach officer with the Chester County Community Foundation. So thank you in advance, our panelists today, for sharing some really great donor and community engagement strategies. So, many of us have aspirational goals to really show up in place for our donors, encouraging and empowering donors to not only connect with the causes they care about, but also to understand and activate around the community's most pressing needs and promising opportunities. Many community foundations are also instrumental in bringing their donors and community together to connect and unite around the important issues facing both the community, but also our nation. We're often the bridge, the connector, the pollinator, and the solution broker. And our donors and the broader community are increasingly looking for community foundations to play that role. So today we're going to dig deep to learn how a variety of community foundations have boldly set the table for conversations that educate, connect, and unite. So we'll share some best practices in cultivating community connections, innovative engagement strategies, and educating donors on critical issues that are affecting our communities. So, Mark Brewer, we'll start with you if that's okay. I know that Central Florida has had a lot of success in hosting what you call table talks, which are, I think, small group conversations to strengthen the muscle of your civic engagement and igniting some really innovative ideas for your community. Can you tell us more about table talks and highlight some of the successes and outcomes from the event?
Sure, Christy, thank you. We've been doing Table Talk for about 4 years now. It's a mix of strategies that is really rooted in community leadership. So understanding that social capital is a critical part of civic engagement, and if people aren't talking to each other in neighborhoods and communities, then you're probably not going to be able to move big complicated strategies forward in the community. We started at this stage trying to put together hundreds of tables on a single day where people can come together with somebody facilitating who is the inviter. So they aren't professionally facilitated. They're happening over breakfast, lunch, dinner, a cocktail, over a cup of coffee. People come together and they're given a package with some information in it about things that are interesting in the community or things they might want to talk about. And then they have a conversation. At the end of that conversation, everyone in the conversation fills out a survey online, and all that data is then collected, put together, and we then share it with elected officials. We share it with the community at large, and we use it as to inform part of our grant making, because the solutions and strategies that people come up with in these conversations are sometimes nothing short of amazing. They find ways to get things done in their community where maybe all they need is a little money or some assistance or a relationship or some partnerships. And over the last 4 years, we've seen these solutions grow. So the micro grants that we make to the actual conversation participants can be used by them to take something that comes out of the conversation and pursue it. We then make grants around the broader issues. So if you've all ever been in the situation, I know you all have, where you're part of a group of community leaders in a conference room somewhere with a whiteboard and everybody's doing big community strategy, what we figured out was that the people in neighborhoods and communities are never in those meetings. And so we may be in community conversations talking about housing or transportation or other things, but you never get the point of view of people from neighborhoods who can come together in these small groups and do it. Last year, we had more than 1,000 conversations on a single day, and we're hoping to better that this year. After the pandemic, the folks coming to them there's more. During the pandemic, we had to do it online, but it was still very successful even during that time. So for us, it's community leadership, but it also brings together certainly donors. And then many places in the community, colleges, high schools, put together big super tables where they put dozens of tables in a space, and they invite people to come sit at those tables and have their discussions. The only facilitation we bring to it is 3 questions to start the conversation, and then, of course, we track what comes out of the conversations. It's been very successful for us.
Gosh, it sounds like it. Can you remind me, a little more about the grant program that's associated with that you mentioned some micro grants, but then maybe some follow-up grants, because I believe this helps inform your then grant making.
It does, yeah. So our grant making, much of what comes out of these conversations, especially as it results in civic engagement or when they result in human services, direct services on the ground in neighborhoods, certainly around housing, certainly around children's programs and other things. We learn a lot in these conversations that then gets embedded into our other grant rounds. But we have a micro grant round, which are mostly $500 to $5,000 grants. And those go based on what comes out of the conversations. It's basically whatever people need to get to the next state. If in the conversation somebody takes responsibility and says, I'm willing to lead this or be a part of it, or we're all willing to go do this together, then we're happy to put money up or bring relationships or bring other people to the table that might be helpful to them, including nonprofits who have come to the table to help build out some of the things that have come from these conversations.
What's this look like internally for you in terms of staff capacity? Is this mostly your kind of community leadership team or community impact team? And then do you also have a big push from your charitable giving side to get your donors engaged?
So we have literally an advisory group that sits around the table each year, determining how we get to where we need to get to. One of the things that you can't do if you do a massive conversation is you can't let people just line up. We want to make certain that we've got good, inclusive, and diverse conversations, and not just the first people who show up and want to have a conversation. So the advisory group really works to make certain that we've got presence in all the communities that we want to be in. And this crosses 4 counties this year. So that's going to be probably 500 tables on the day of the conversation, October 19th. And so that advisory group, which is a volunteer leadership, comes together to help make that happen. And then internally, it's our community leadership team that does all the heavy lifting on the ground.
Wow, it sounds incredible. Thanks so much for sharing that. And Melanie, I see, do you have your hand up? Do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Yes. Mark, you mentioned that you ask 3 questions of the group. I was wondering if you might share what those 3 questions are, please.
They vary a little bit every year, but generally it's, what do you like best about the community that you live in? What would you like to see change in the community you live in? And what would you be willing to take responsibility to change? And so as they have these discussions, the outcome then provides a fair amount of data for this survey as they go deep into it. And then clearly, if you're having a conversation in a boardroom somewhere, no one ever raises their hand and says, I'll take that on. But in these conversations, people do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Things from, safer track for children walking to school. We had some programs come out of that one year that were very successful, all the way up to larger issues of community safety and livability, for which we've had some good projects come out of these conversations.
Two really quick questions. That those micro grants, is that an application process, Mark?
Yeah, so after it's all over, any of the grant tables can apply for a grant by simply submitting what the idea they've got is and what they want to do with it. They typically don't know how much it costs, so we usually figure out what the amount of the grant can be. I mean, if it's simple, they might know, but typically if they're going to go on with planning or make this into something bigger or launch it and need some assistance, we work with them to help figure out how much that's going to cost to get it done.
My other quick question, have you garnered some media attention from these efforts?
Oh, yeah. We have relationships with major media and public radio here, which they do a town hall on the same day and invite listeners to participate in that.
That's a great connection. Good. All right. Well, thank you for sharing. We'll draw you back in when we have some, general questions for the panel. But next I'm going to turn to Karen Simmons and Timmy Nelson. And you host something you call, I believe, Community Conversations in Pennsylvania. Can you tell us more about the genesis and evolution of hosting these conversations and sort of what they look like for your community?
Yeah, Christy, we could, but I think our community conversations are going to evolve into these table talks. So Timmy and I got to go to Mark's so we can head down to Florida for October 19th. So that is terrific. So thank you for a great idea already. For our community foundation, we're a relatively small community foundation outside of Philadelphia in the outlying counties, and heads up to Virginia Friends, who's my next door neighbor county I haven't seen in a while. And Timmy Nelson came on 2-3 years ago now, Timmy, volunteer, and he is an outreach advisor. Our community conversations, and I'm actually going to go to our website because it's all there, and then Timmy's going to take over on some of the chat here. But our community conversations started back. Let me see where it went. Here we go. Here, can you see the website? Is that up there? Social Justice?
Yes, I see it.
Yeah, so you can see in the chat room, it's chescocf.org, Social Justice. We'd always been doing gatherings, but, back when COVID hit, we had to start to Zoom. And then George Floyd really made the young folks on staff say, we've got to do something. We can't just sit back in this mostly white Republican Chester County and not do something. We have to make some change. So I said to the young interns and new staff, okay, let's make some change. And we got the board's A-OK to go ahead and do something with community leadership in the community. We'd always been pretty quiet behind the scenes. And so over the last few years, these community conversations have morphed into all kinds of topics that have to do with diversity, inclusion, equity, and social justice. And the community conversations take place once a month. And for Chester County, they're a bit edgy, which is right what we need, but we had to be Chester County nice to do them well. And I think, Timmy, at first, it was just my lovely white staff who was facilitating these because we really didn't have a lot of outreach. And as we got introduced to other people, thank you for coming on board, Timmy. Timmy said, don't put me on your board of directors like everybody wants to. Let me really help you nurture other people and increase the number of people who are involved. So you can see the kind of topics we do on our community conversations. The other thing that is important is when we look at it, we also started an idea council. And I'm trying to get that up on the screen because to me, the idea council is the key. The community conversations got together a bunch of folks on a regular, anybody can come in monthly and we Zoom, and those are good things. But the Idea Council we formed in order to help us really deepen our relationships. And at first, we just had the Idea Council look at our operations at our community foundation across the organization. And then we realized it was going to morph into even more than that. So the Idea Council also Zooms in every month and really has started to break down some silos across the county when it comes to the various issues people are working on related to social justice and diversity. Timmy, do you want to jump in and add some more ideas? Because when we look at the Idea Council, it's really taken on a whole knife with community foundations and community conversations.
Sure, Karen, thanks. I'll start with community conversations, if you don't mind, to give you a flavor for how that format works. We had to make it convenient. We had to make it interesting, but not intimidating. And some of the topics that we talk about today can be intimidating. And people tend to think, are you blaming me for issues and concerns? No, that's not the flavor for Idea Councils. I mean, for the community conversations. Community conversations include, it's during the lunch hour. So it's like a lunch and learn, if you would. We use typically a TED Talk with that, a TED Talk that kind of gathers your attention. And that gives people something to spring off of. And we also put together a PowerPoint presentation. We then select some members from the community, typically on our Idea Council, but members from the community that have some subject matter expertise with these subjects. And so with those things combined, it's an hour long, it's mostly discussion. There's a video that goes along with it. So it doesn't, quote unquote, put anyone on the spot, if you would, but it gives them an opportunity to share and learn at the same time. The Idea Council, as Karen talked about, kind of sprung from that. And the Idea Council, I'll give you one example of the Idea Council, how that has morphed into something greater than we thought it would be. It has now become a community advisory board for our local hospital. Our local hospital is very involved in diversity and making sure they reach all portions of our county. And they came to us. We came to them to ask them to join the Idea Council. And they said, we have a better one for you. How about we come to you and you let us utilize your Idea Council as our community advisory board. So when we have issues and concerns and we think we have the solutions, we can come to your Idea Council, share with them what our thoughts are, but then be open and earnestly ask them for their input so we know that we're doing the right things in the right areas with the right people. And it has worked out phenomenally.
That's really great. So I saw, okay, so you have a TED Talk. So you have somebody do that. One person offers sort of a high level.
You pick a TED Talk.
We will pick a TED Talk.
You pick an existing TED Talk.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's all Zoom. It's free and Zoomable.
Okay, got you. And then I also saw some handouts and things. So is that where you're distributing maybe some data or some resources or things like that? Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, they're all examples. This is the handout from the anti-Semitism one. So you can see we picked a few thought leaders who are exceptional. We have other funders and chambers of commerce and NAACPs who are our promotional partners to get the word out. We put forth our little housekeeping notes and we do a little background on key terms. And those are our thought leaders. And we dive into a TED Talk that we have pre-selected and ranked and rated that's less than usually 10 minutes long. And in this case, there were 2 of them. And then the thought leaders lead a session. First, we start in the full group room and then we do chat rooms.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that people can meet and greet. And it's all recorded. The handouts are up there. The thought leaders are available. And we say it lasts an hour, but sometimes if it goes over and people want to stay, they stay. But everybody can leave by an hour. So
yeah, that's a lot to fit in an hour.
Thank you.
Tim.
Well, and that's a great point, Christy. And we share that this is not necessarily intended to answer the questions, but to start the conversation.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It starts it and it keeps it rolling. So we have anywhere from, I'm going to say 20 to 80 people per month in it, usually about 30 to 50, zooming in, and it's different people every month. And it's really allowed us to broaden our partnership. When we find people who are recurring and coming back, we ask them to start to serve on committees, and we make sure they can start to come to our other events.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it starts to reach into the other programs. We reach out and develop people for servers on boards, to plant the seeds for creating legacy funds, but really to talk about social justice and community change and what action do they take and how can we help.
Mm-hmm.
I think Melissa came in on one of them that had to do with Black maternal health. And that group has turned into an action group that's having a conference in another 2 weeks at the hospital with some key government officials, as well as funders and people who are served by the issue. So we seed the groups to support them if they so desire and have the energy.
That's great. Timmy, do you use the Idea Council to help you come up with the topics, or how do you do that? Is that on an annual basis that you kind of set the agenda for the year?
It is, we do. We have some topics, some general topics we take a look at. For instance, for this year, we're looking at income inequality, diversity, racism, education. There's a session on Black history. There's a session on nutrition, health, and wellness, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll pick topics, general topics like that, find the right TED Talks, and that takes some time to find the right TED Talk that sends the message that you want and will attract people to your session. And then from that point, as Karen mentioned, we select the speakers. We try to find speakers that have expertise in that area. If you look at our list of Idea Council, and I encourage you to look at our website, if you look at our Idea Council, you'll find people from all walks of life. We have elected officials.
Yeah.
We have university representatives. We have people from the Domestic Violence Center. We have all walks of life. Once again, you can find someone that fits in there, because this is our community.
Super interesting. Thank you for sharing that. We'll continue to monitor any questions, or if people have them, put them in the chat or raise your hand. If I'm missing it, somebody call me out on that. And we'll then move on to Eileen, if you're ready. I know you've seen a lot of community interest and success in hosting community book clubs, and that really caught my eye or my ear when I heard you talking about it. Can you tell us more about your book club and how community foundations can foster a sense of shared community and belonging through initiatives like a book club or a community conversation?
Sure. Thank you, Christy. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this today. So just give you a 1 minute of how I got here to this topic. As a citizen, just as a citizen of the country, I've been very worried about the political and cultural polarization of our country. And I know we've all felt this worry very deeply, no matter what our political predilections are. And I think just about any American citizen of goodwill is worried about where we are as a country and all the social and cultural divisions. But the thought that the organization that I happen to be running as the president and CEO had any role at all to play in that area never even crossed my mind until July of 2021, when I read an op-ed article in the Washington Post written by Michael Gerson that was called "We Need a National Effort at Civic Healing." And in that article, he encouraged every organization that he called institutions of renewal to play whatever role they could in the renewal and reinvention of our social discourse. And in the op-ed, he talked about some proposed solutions, like he mentioned better civics education, or a year of national service, all things that community foundations could actually address, or institutional reforms like ranked choice voting or independent redistricting commissions, etc. But then he said this, he said, that all sounds like naive do-gooderism. He said, but let me rise in defense of do-gooderism as a defining American characteristic. He said, civic healing is only possible with some measure of civic idealism. And at the risk of sounding overly dramatic, I must say that that op-ed changed my thinking about the scope of the challenges a community foundation could be tackling. So I thought if everyone in my community, as well as in the country, is worried about the civic and social divisions of our nation, and if community foundations were in fact created to address the core concerns of a community, why shouldn't we be looking at this? So I started where I always start when I have a thought like this. I started looking around the community foundation world, this world, the world that's on the Zoom screen today, which I have found to just be an infinite source of inspiration for me previously over the years. And I had a conversation with Stu Comstock. He runs the Delaware Community Foundation. And Stu has been running an annual book club in Delaware for 5 or 6 years, but he was telling me about his 2022 book selection, which was a book by Monica Guzman called I Never Thought of It That Way. And here it is. And Monica Guzman is a journalist with the Seattle Times, and she's also one of the founding partners of a group called Braver Angels, which is trying to tamp down the political and polarization of the country in a very grassroots way. And she wrote this book called I Never Thought of It That Way. And the byline of the book is how to have fearlessly curious conversations in dangerously divided times. So Stu and his staff, at my request, conducted a webinar, and it was a year ago, it was around December, for community foundations, including ours, that was interested in doing book clubs. And he basically gave us the Delaware Community Foundation playbook on how to conduct a community-wide book club. So we decided to do Monica Guzman's book as our very first book club in 2023. And we started advertising it in January. We advertised the fact that we were going to host a community-wide book club from January to June. We were just advertising it. And we built a functionality on our website that captured the names and contact information of people that wanted to participate. And then in July, we sent everybody who had signed up a copy of the book. So we had about 475 signups, bought 475 copies of the book, and sent them to everybody who had signed up. But between January and June, we were promoting this like crazy on all of our channels. Our social media engagement on the book was just through the roof. It was unprecedented. The level of social media interest, particularly on LinkedIn, which is an audience that tends to trend a bit younger than our other channels, was just phenomenal. In fact, my VP of communications keeps asking me, when's the next book club? Because it was just so remarkable how many people started to engage with us on it. And so we're hosting these book club meetings now. Members of my staff and me too have conducted several book clubs. We actually threw out some dates for individuals who are not affiliated with book clubs already to sign up, and offered to host a meeting. So I've conducted a few. 2 other members of my staff have conducted a few. And then there's dozens of book clubs across the region with their own leadership that are conducting their own discussions on the book. And we've got a capstone event coming up in mid-November. We've actually lined up the author, Monica Guzman. Pursuant to a speaker's contract, to do a fireside chat with me on the book. We just got off the phone with her a few days ago to sort of put the fine print on the fireside chat and figure out exactly how the flow of that was going to go. So my point there is that it's not over yet. And I will say that the book so the discussion itself has gotten a lot of attention, and wherever I go, people are more likely to ask me about that than about just about anything else the Community Foundation is doing, including all of our grant making and our conferences and convenings and such. And we have heard, the feedback has been largely positive about the effort, right? There have been some mixed results, like we've gotten feedback that the book was too liberal. And what in the world were you doing assigning a book that's this liberal to us? We've also gotten feedback that the book was too conservative. And what in the world were you thinking assigning this conservative book, So when I heard that second side to it, I thought, you know what? It sounds like Monica Guzman might have struck the exact right chord.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
she's sending people on the far right and left, both sides, who are just sort of comfortable in their corners and don't really want to come out into the arena to have the conversations that it's going to take to do some civic healing here. But anyway, that's the story.
I love it. And I was glad to hear you mention the capstone, because I was wondering how you kind of bring it all together and, bring it all home. Is that something that Delaware had in their model as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And Stu had something very interesting to say about that. He and his staff were sharing that the people who signed up for the book and the people who signed up for his conversation with Monica were two very different crowds. Like there was there was some overlap, but not nearly as much as he had expected. So it almost seems like the event is going to garner one kind of constituents, whereas actually reading the book and then discussing the book is going to attract an entirely different kind of community foundation constituent. But he told me that he did last year 500 copies of the book. So I was telling him we were somewhere at the time when we were talking, we were between 450 and 475, and he said that is just fabulous. Like, that's great.
Yeah. So can you just remind me, is it like a 5-month long process, or
it's a year-long process that started in January. We actually promoted it for 6 full months and built a website that, can capture information for folks that wanted to sign up. But we also promoted it in every one of our channels, email, online, and as I mentioned, in social.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's super interesting. And Bob, we'll have you, whoops. Oh, hold on, you guys. I just did something. We'll have you unmute. And thank you for your patience. Can't wait to hear from you today too. I'm interested in hearing what you have to share about successful community and donor engagement strategies around key dates, such as community foundation anniversaries and other milestones that can really be a catalyst for engaging the community. And I know you've got some things to share with us, so I'll open to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Christy. It's been great to hear all of these great examples of how you engage community. And I think ours is probably a little bit more of a traditional example, but we're proud of the results that we had. So in 2017, the Community Foundation turned 75 years old. And to leverage the anniversary, we wanted to really kind of think about, well, what are we going to do with this rather than just have a one-night party? And so we came up with 3 goals. The first was in communications. We wanted to raise the awareness of and the affinity for the Community Foundation. Our second goal was to look at community impact to really connect the community to our unique value proposition. And the third was donor engagement to grow our assets. And so in terms of raising awareness, we decided to have a year-long celebration instead of a one-night gala. Community foundations have this kind of complicated story, and it always benefits by repetition. And so we thought if we do this over the course of the year, we'll be able to tell our story more often in a repetitive way that people will really hopefully start to understand who we are and what we do. And as part of that year-long celebration, we would give a gift to the community every month. To build anticipation and frankly to attract media attention. Let me just go back here. So the second piece, in terms of promoting our unique value proposition, we gave a $75,000 grant to the community every month for that year. We brought about 40 people together to really talk about what are the unique assets in our community and how we might leverage that.
Bob, can you say that one more time? How did you bring people together, or who did you?
So we had a couple of meetings where we talked about what are the unique assets in our community and what do they need. And so, as we really wanted to reflect that we know this place. And frankly, we know this place in ways that community gift funds don't know it. So for example, Dane County is the epicenter of the effigy mound building culture. It is tremendously unique to have the effigy mounds throughout Madison, throughout Dane County that we have. And so one of the things we funded was the First Nations Heritage Tour. We're a platinum biking community, but we know that there is unequal access to this tremendous asset based on your economic needs. And so we founded Free Bikes for Kids. And we're the city of 4 lakes. Our capital is on an isthmus between 2 large lakes. And so we paid for a feasibility study for a waterfront redesign in a park that surrounds a Frank Lloyd Wright designed convention center. So again, we really wanted to underscore our role as the community's foundation, and we coined the term with an apostrophe S. You know,
I like that. Mm-hmm.
throughout the 75th anniversary. And then finally, we wanted to think about, you know, we had done a feasibility study to do a campaign, and people were kind of like, yeah, we don't really want to give for community impact or unrestricted. And so we said, you know, one way we can approach this is to do a legacy campaign. Frankly, to clean up our existing legacy society at the time, which was kind of a loose affiliation of 102 commitments. You know, if somebody, you know, sneezed in the elevator and you thought you heard legacy, they were in. And so we thought, all right, we got to clean up the legacy society. We want to add 75 new legacies. And, you know, we developed some criteria for what that meant. So there had to be some form of documentation. You know, people can change it at any time, but we wanted them to take this seriously. And they had to leave something to the endowment, because part of our unique value proposition is the legacy we're creating for the community long term. So a few outcomes that I'll share with you. In terms of awareness, we yielded 226 media impressions, so articles, interviews, all sorts of things in the paper. We launched 4 different social media platforms, which now have over 9,500 followers. So I think at the time, during the 75th, we grew those platforms collectively to about half of that, maybe about 5,000. In terms of our unique value proposition, people absolutely loved the grants. The day before the grants would come out, you know, we would send something out. You could see the, you know, people joining social media as we were about to announce the next grant. It was very engaging for the community. And so one of the things that we gave to, again, was the Nolan Front waterfront redesign. It proved to be incredibly popular. We gave $75,000 to get this idea off the ground. The city immediately followed our 75th anniversary with a $500,000 commitment to bring in, you know, some top architects from across the country to do a design challenge. Just about a month ago, the community selected the top architect. And, you know, this is a mile of shorefront. This project alone will cost hundreds of millions of dollars to redevelop. But right now it's train tracks and a highway. So you can get a sense for the challenge. But this community has absolutely embraced it. One of our favorite stories, we also happen to have, we are the home of the state capitol for Wisconsin, a beautiful building. It was its 100th anniversary. And so there's a statue on the Capitol grounds that reflects the state's motto forward. And the statue, as you can see here, is of a woman thrusting her arm above. It comes from the prior Capitol, which burned to the ground. So the statue was designed, you can see Jean Pond Minor here in 1895 working on it. So it was designed by a woman of a woman. It was funded in 1895 by women. When the Capitol burned down, it was restored by women. And so 2 female artists had an exhibition around this statue, and since then have created a $500,000 endowment. There was so much excitement about this project that the endowment now awards 2 gifts every year for women artists. And then I touched on Free Bikes for Kids. It was originally Mad About Bikes. You know, it is now a separate 501c3 nonprofit organization. They have refurbished and given away over 10,000 bikes. It's actually really not about free bikes for kids anymore as it is free bikes for families, because mom and dad want to go biking with their kids. And so, you know, things have evolved since then. And so then finally, and in terms of asset growth, we brought in our 3 past presidents to help. There are no gaps in the 40-year history of leadership. We had a little bit of a friendly competition, I'll say, and we had a donor commit $1,000 for every new legacy that was committed. So it would provide a bit of a sense of urgency. So as I said, prior to the 75th, we had about 102 commitments. We hope to add 75. We actually added 101. So we blew past the goal of 75. The donor upped her commitment in the middle of this so we could hit that 100. And if we extrapolate based on what we know from existing legacies, those legacies should be about $40 million in gifts over. And then we've gone from 2 to 4 commitments a year to 8 to 10 commitments a year. So we now have about 279 commitments to the legacy.
Oh, wow, that's great.
So it was tremendously successful. I think the thing that I most appreciated was the opportunity that it gave us to gather the community's attention and just the tremendous support they provided MCF.
Can you talk more about where, and maybe you said this and I missed it, but the $1 million that you committed to the 12 gifts, where did that come from?
So
and did it take away from your grant making at all that year, or was
it did.
In addition? Okay.
Yeah, so we have, last year we distributed about 19 million, about 2 million annually comes from our unrestricted grant making pool. So it's a small portion of everything we give. About half of that is field of interest funds. So this was really, it was a mix of our unrestricted and our field of interest, depending on what the grant was, but it cut in half our grant making available for that year. And we let people know well in advance that that was going to be the case.
That's really great. Any other questions that I see? So I'm going to open a question to the panel and you all can just unmute and answer as you're comfortable. But when you think broadly about philanthropy and growing charitable giving, how did this work help you move ahead your mission and your goals related to that? A lot of the work was around sort of your community leadership, but did it talk about the donor connection and response?
Yeah, for us, community investment is the way we spotlight the work of the foundation. We don't actually call our fund holders donors, we call them community investors. And so whenever we do social capital work, it's really about bringing people around to have discussions that build the understanding of what community investment is and why you should be a part of that, why you should do that yourself, and make investments in the community through whatever nonprofits you care most about.
It really is the value proposition, right?
It is.
You know. Okay, great. I know someone
would like to add to that, Christy, for ours, the community leadership outreach. We had always been pretty quiet about our outreach, present at community planning meetings and things like that. I would say for us, and Timmy, you could chime in, this community conversations and the Idea Council are about the long haul. This is not about short term, we're going to get people to start new funds. Because a lot of the people who are in here, we're developing relationships that are trustworthy with, and it's going to take a long, long time. And we actually have lost some fund advisors from this because there are some people who don't think that we should be having these kinds of conversations with our community. We've lost them, and they shouldn't be under our umbrella for philanthropy if they don't believe in humankind. But we had to stand up to that as well.
You had full board support for that, Karen?
The board had to come to grips with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Christy, our phrase is connecting people who care with causes that matter. And what we found also is that this has been an introduction to the Community Foundation for people who didn't know what the Community Foundation did. And we're getting those questions now as to what the Community Foundation does and how can I be a part of that. And it's returning that investment. The Community Foundation has invested in the community. Now the community is trying to find ways to invest back in the Community Foundation.
I think our anniversary was really geared toward organizational development primarily. So it's not surprising that a lot of, the increase in the number of legacies coming out. What we also leaned into heavily was to make sure that we would diversify not only our grant making, but our donor base. And we were really gratified. We have a diverse staff, a diverse board. and the trust that grew as people saw, how we went about our grant making process, what we valued in the community, what we chose to highlight, because in every community, there's a lot of things to highlight. And of the dozen grants, particularly highlighting the Ho-Chunk community and their presence in Madison for 12,000 years. This has been a community long before the community that most people identify with. So I think we're grateful that we've been able to use that trajectory as we move forward. And again, that community's foundation with an apostrophe S was really helpful to us.
Yeah, I like that. Can you, let's talk about partnerships a little bit. Could you share an example, if you have one, of a successful community partnership that your foundation has formed to really engage donors to address specific community needs, or innovative ways that you've educated your, what do you call them, community investors, into, become more educated about and, hopefully inspired to come together to support something? Do you have any examples of that?
Sure. In our case, we have a number of different components of the foundation that are really meant to be connectors to philanthropy. And because we're strategic philanthropy and we really don't get involved much in retail philanthropy. So we don't do fundraisers, and we're not really talking to people about making small gifts. I don't mean that all of them are huge. It just means that there's an outcome expected when you get involved in strategic philanthropy. So we have two venture philanthropy groups, one of them called 100 Women Strong. The other one's called the Venture Philanthropists. And these are groups of people that literally come together with content experts, and they focus on trying to solve a community issue. And then they make grants into these issues, get the outcomes, and spin out whatever the thing they build is so that it can continue on. And really, that's a training ground for future fund holders at the foundation. We also run a social enterprise accelerator, which pushes through about 16 social enterprise companies a year. So these are for-profit and nonprofit social enterprises where they're profitable, but their social measures are as important as their balance sheets. So the idea is that they're sustainable as they come through. And what that's done is engaged a lot of angel investors in the community who now see philanthropy as a potential investment point. And through Rally, they can see the social outcomes and how important they are, which brings them to the foundation table to look at other things that we do in the community.
So is that on your website, Mark?
It is.
And would you consider that an impact investing program?
It definitely is.
Okay.
Definitely.
Very interesting. Good. Other examples of partnerships?
Yeah, Christy, I'll share one other thought. So our mantra these days at our community foundation is that we do nothing alone. I don't ever want to do anything alone again. The thought that one institution of any kind can actually change anything is just not realistic. And if you want to actually change something for the better, you have to do it in partnership with a lot of other people and a lot of other institutions across the region. So folks saw what we were doing with the book club, and we actually convened recently several of our local anchor institutions like the higher eds, several of the chambers, the health system, the regional commission. And we got everybody together in a room talking about the civic and social polarization of America and the loss of social trust, and what each of us could be doing, not only together, but in our own lanes to really live the words institution of renewal, and we were very conscious in saying it's not about what you're going to help our community foundation doing. It's not about our donors. It's not about philanthropy. It's about what we're going to do as a region to tamp down the polarization of America. There's an authenticity to that. It has nothing to do with fundraising or grant making, but many of you, if not all of you, are probably familiar with Gabriel Casper and a study he came out with a couple of years ago called What's Next for Philanthropy in the 2020s. And in that study, he proposed what he called edges of the practice, like what are on the edges of the practice that he sees emerging in the near future. One of those edges was what he calls rethinking philanthropy's role. you know, this idea that we're not just grant makers, we're not just traditional philanthropists, we're not just conveners for philanthropists, we're change agents. And if we're change agents, how can we do that alone? So I don't think of partnership in terms of donor engagement, but partnership does engage our donors. And our anchors are hugely supportive of our work, and they are our donors, you know. It's just that we're not doing it with that as the frontal lobe reason. You know, the frontal lobe reason is, how are we going to address this horrible issue?
Bob, I saw that you unmuted.
Yeah, one of the things that has been most successful for us is, there's a hunger for information in our community. So 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we added the Greater Madison Nonprofit Directory to our website, and that highlights every nonprofit in a 6-county region. It is backed up by GuideStar, and it is the most visited page on our website, almost monthly, usually about 600 people who from unique IP addresses. Well, that moved us into this idea about how do we gather information. We paired with UW Extension, and one of our staff members, along with UW Extension, authored a report based on the conversations with 72 nonprofits about what do they need, what kind of capacity building resources do they need. Long story short, in our strategic plan, we are likely to be launching a nonprofit resource hub. And the way that it'll connect people, connect organizations, is it'll do things like have a library for strategic plans in our community, and we'll have a staff member dedicated to saying, okay, we've got Downtown Madison Incorporated, the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Latino Chamber of Commerce, the Madison Region Economic Partnership, etc. As we look across all these organizations, what are the similarities we see in their strategic plans that we want to raise up? Perhaps what are the gaps that we see that nobody, it's really, people spend a lot of money developing these plans, but they don't really execute them necessarily relative to how they fit into the community. So we're pretty excited about it. We think and hope it'll bring value.
Thank you.
Christy.
Karen and Timmy, I saw you both unmute.
I saw
Okay.
Timmy. Go ahead.
Christy, I just want to comment on Eileen and Bob's comments. That really hits pay dirt, if you would, I guess, because when you look at many investors, they kind of know what they want to, how they want to allocate their dollars.
Mm-hmm.
But go back to our phrase, connecting people who care with causes that matter. They may not know about some of these causes that really matter until they hear about them through one of our community conversations, through the Idea Council, folks that are involved in our other programs, the Get On Board program, all these other programs we're doing. They may not know about these programs. And so they may not invest because they don't know about them. And likewise, people that we're drawing to our programs are people that may not understand what the Community Foundation does. Now they do, so there's a partnership that develops because of that. So we're bringing together different sectors of our communities with race, with diversity, with all types of extenuating circumstances, but we're bringing people together that now understand how the community can work together. And that's what we're seeing when we do our programming.
Karen?
It resonate with what Eileen had said about really being concerned about the civic dialogue and the civic direction of the country. And so as we try to bring these community conversations out to help people have the difficult conversations and then figure out what they can work on together, it really, it's just a small step trying to chip away at the civic dialogue in the country. And the fact is, we just use social justice as that overarching philanthropy term to keep it rolling. So it's not about creating legacy funds now, it's about actually having a country around. And this also for us fits into the America 250 initiative. And I don't know how it's affecting other community foundations, but we actually have been hired by the commissioners to orchestrate it in this county. And it has not just to do with the fact that 1776 plus 250 years in 2026 means we celebrate this semi-sesquicentennial. It's not about the parties and the log cabins and parades. It's about the community conversations about civic dialogue and social justice. And that's why we are so interested in pushing along the community conversations that have to do with liberty and justice for all. So we're seeing that as sort of a way to help to shine some light on it. And when we were just talking with the commissioners today, and we know that 2024 is going to be one heck of a year that's going to drain people like crazy when it comes to the elections and getting out the vote and what the dialogue is going to look like. And then we have the 250th celebration of our nation coming on the tails of that. So how are we going to raise up this conversation so there is liberty and justice for all? It's a huge task.
It is a huge task, especially when you consider that our elected officials benefit from our divisions.
They do.
And therefore amplify them.
Mm-hmm.
So if we think our electeds are going to lead us out of this,
They're having fun. They're making money, they're getting power, they're getting control, they're getting eyeballs, views, they're getting all kinds of things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Serious conversations for partnerships. Never do anything alone, as Eileen said.
Exactly. Well, as a moderator, it's challenging to know when to stop, but I see that we've only got a few minutes left, so that I don't think we're going to have time for another question or closing comments. But Eileen and Bob and Timmy and Karen and Mark, thank you so much for taking time to lead us in this conversation. I learned so much during these roundtables, and so I'm glad everyone took time to join. This is one that I'm really going to value the recording of, and likely watch it with my leadership team to learn from your great ideas and think about what we might be able to implement here in Iowa. So with that, I'll just remind you all that we do have another CEONet COF roundtable on the books. It is for November 2nd, and we'll be discussing the legal impact of the Supreme Court decision to strike down affirmative action programs in the case of Students for Fair Admissions, and Council of Foundations Legal will be helping to guide that discussion. So definitely registration is open for that already. So you can go to either CEONet or COF websites and get registered. And I look forward to seeing you all then as we take a quick break from our very busy year-end activities in the Community Foundation world on November 2nd. So in the meantime, feel free to keep the conversation going on the Philanthropy Exchange. And if you've got any questions or ideas for future programming, just get in touch with Melissa or with me. Again, thank you to our panelists, and I hope y'all have just a fabulous rest of your week, and thanks for all that you do.
Thanks, Christy.